Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be joining us from. Welcome. I'm joined today by my colleague, Jeff Reichard. And Jeff, you're no stranger to the live stream. I was just looking at this, and I think on episode, is it 98 we're at, that you probably, or maybe it's 97, that you've probably been the most frequent guest. So welcome back.
It's great to be back, and it's great to be talking about ransomware again with you, Dave.
And speaking of back, you're just back from a Veeam in-person event in London. And speaking of the globe, want to give a shout out to everyone where you're tuning in from. Invite you to join the chat and put in a comment where you might be viewing. We've already got, in addition to our production team, which is located in Colorado, that's me. We've got Jeff in the Northeast area, and we've got Mark in Georgia, as well as our colleague Catrinell overseas in Romania. But we've got France and we have Germany and Africa already joining, India as well, I see. So be sure to give a shout out on that. And if you have any comments about what we're chatting about, feel free to drop that in. Our production team will get that over to us. So, Jeff, what we've been talking about now for a fair number of weeks has been ransomware. And unfortunately, there's a bad reason why. I was going to say there's a good reason why, but it's really not that good, is it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that probably most folks who are dialed in are familiar with the Ransomware Trends Report that we just wrapped up. These stats on this slide aren't from that report. They're actually from the Data Protection Trends Report. And we asked 3,400 respondents worldwide, mix of large and small organizations in all different verticals, mostly large organizations, mostly over 1,000. But we asked, simple question, how often have you been hit by ransomware in the last 12 months? And Dave, why don't you unpack what we heard?
Yeah, what's interesting is, you always look at the outliers immediately, and only 24% said that they were not compromised by ransomware in the last 12 months. So that means obviously 76% were. And what's concerning, and the reason why we're continuing to double click and offer more data points from that ransomware research is, as you can see here, the top responses were getting hit twice in a 12-month period, or 3 times in a 12-month period. But Jeff, I know you focus a great deal on certain verticals like public sector. What are the results in that environment?
Yeah, the average, as you point out, is between 2 and 3 attacks per year. But our research shows that for folks in public sector, and by that, when we do this survey, we mean both national or federal level government, but also local government and educational institutions we add in with that. When you look at that community of respondents, not only are ransomware attacks the most significant kind of attack or kind of outage that they have, but they're also the most frequent. And for this slide, the stat that bears that out the most clearly is that if you look at the worst statistic here, that is hit more than 6 times by ransomware attacks in the past year, globally, only 1% said that that was their situation, that they'd only been hit, more than 6, only 1% responded yes. If you expand that and look only at public sector, it was actually double that. 2% of our public sector respondents had been hit more than 6 times in the year by ransomware. So it's definitely a significant threat.
Yeah, perfect. And from now on, the remaining slides, we're going to double click a little bit around the organizational aspect. A couple weeks from now, we're going to be talking more around technology, and I'll call it the kind of the rescue. But Jeff, let's unpack a little bit around the alignment of cybersecurity teams and business continuity, disaster recovery professionals. Now, on this first portion of the graphic we're showing, we asked, to what extent do you think the cybersecurity strategies are part of your business continuity disaster recovery strategy, or are they handled separately? The good news, Jeff, I will say is, again, I'll go to the boundary condition, 0% said that cyber and business continuity disaster recovery are handled entirely uniquely. But there is some room for improvement.
There's definite room for improvement. If you look at the stats here, only 40% in the global pool of respondents, and again, this is the big data protection trends report that we do, 3,400 respondents worldwide, or 3,300 and change. 40% said yes, they're completely integrated as one strategy. Before the advent of ransomware, that number would surely have been a lot lower than it is now, right? Because I remember clearly at points in my career that the idea of business continuity and disaster recovery was focused entirely on things like power outages or natural disasters that might take your data center down. Those days are long past, but still, only 40% of our respondents said that the cybersecurity and business continuity or DR strategies are completely integrated.
Yeah, great point. I mean, again, the good news is it's zero for saying that they're completely orthogonal. 40% is good, but could be better. I want to pause on that because we've got a lot of activity today. I want to hit the world map again and highlight, you can see obviously Canada, Toronto in particular, brings up a lot of real estate. We also have now joining us Missouri and Texas from North America, as well as Florida. And if we look over at rest of the world, we've got Germany, Netherlands, the UK, Spain, Poland, Armenia, and Czech Republic. And we've got Argentina showing up. And I should not just say Africa. I want to give a special shout out to Mauritania, who, Jeff, I believe may be the first time we've had that country here on the stream. And then India, of course, as well. So many thanks for all of that. Please keep those comments coming where you're tuning in from and anything else you may want to share. So let's now go back to our research around alignment. I purposely kind of saved this one because it's a little bit busy chart, but if we go through and we say, okay, let's look now at the specific roles. We actually, you can see in the fine print here, we interviewed 4 different personas. In the leftmost bar, that's IT operations staff, the backup administrator, second to the left bar, security professionals in the second to the right bar, and then the chief information security officer or some equivalent IT exec in the right-hand bar. Jeff, what stuck out in your mind across these 4 different roles?
Well, so the interesting things here are that we do have, speaking very generally, broad agreement in the numbers. There's not that terribly much divergence in these. But if we look at the most optimistic number, which is that bright yellow bar here, that our business continuity and DR are completely integrated as one strategy with the cybersecurity posture, the folks in the organization who are least convinced that that's the case are the security and IT professionals.
Yes.
So it looks pretty clear. If you look at the 2 bars, the two graphs on the right, the security professional or the chief information security officer, they're 21 and 19% respectively, who have some serious doubts that their area of expertise, the organization's security posture, has been fully integrated or integrated maybe as much as it needs to be into the organization's business continuity and DR plan.
Yeah, and I know, speaking of live events and then what we're describing here, Jeff, at our Veeam in Las Vegas, which we did hybrid, but we returned to live for the first time in 3 years, you actually attended 2 different customer focus groups on ransomware, I believe.
Yeah, and we asked this question. We at Veeam spend a lot of time, and Dave and I spend a lot of time talking with industry analysts, but we also spend a lot of time talking with customers. And obviously, what we want to get out of that is a clearer understanding of the challenges and issues that the enterprises that Veeam works with are dealing with, and a clear direction on what Veeam should be doing in response. At those 2 focus groups, we asked questions about of the attendees who were mostly on the IT operations or storage and backup admin side. We asked this exact question, but we dug down into greater detail and asked what specific sorts of network monitoring or intrusion detection or endpoint response tools do you have deployed? The answer that we got overwhelmingly from the backup and IT operations side, which in these graphs are the 2 leftmost bars, were that they weren't in the loop and talked to by their security teams about what different mechanisms were in place. That makes sense if we're talking about keeping information from external communities. You obviously don't want to reveal to potential adversaries what what your safeguards are, what your tools are, what your architecture is. But it would be kind of hard for security to be fully implemented into an organization's business continuity and disaster recovery plan if the IT and operations teams don't know what those tools are. So there's definitely, based on the feedback that I got in person, talking with those two groups of customers at Veeam back in May, there's definitely room for improvement.
Yeah, what I think it's interesting, if you look at the backup administrator, that second to the left stacked bar, you kind of see this two ends of the spectrum in terms of the results, meaning the highest response in that light green of completely integrated actually is the backup administrator at 28% versus the other three different constituencies. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, if you add up not integrated or somewhat integrated, that totals 22%, which is also the highest of all four personas.
It's a little schizophrenic. And what I think that points to, I mean, to the extent that the reason that we get this information is so that we can draw conclusions from it. And I think just as I learned having conversations with folks face to face a couple of months ago at Veeam, what this reveals is that to an extent, the backup teams are out of the loop with respect to what the security teams are doing and what they think needs to be done. That we do not have as close a handshake between those groups as we need to.
Yeah, I would agree. And what I would say is positive, though, is I think security teams are very much realizing that backup and recovery in particular plays a strong role in ransomware preparedness and response. But as we'll see now, let me click over to the next slide where we asked this question. Now let's look forward, meaning can we improve our cybersecurity and backup posture? So the question was simple here and kind of the orange in the middle. How much improvement do you believe is required for your organization's IT backup team or teams and your cybersecurity team or teams to be fully aligned? And again, I'll hit the boundary condition, Jeff. That 1% saying no improvement is required. If our colleague Jason was here, he would say, bless their hearts, because that's probably not indicative of real world reality. But what's your take on this particular data?
Well, the security professionals that I work with, the more they know, the more paranoid they are.
Yes.
So yes, no improvement is required is a very unlikely response from folks that are knowledgeable about the current threat landscape. If you add up the numbers that are in different shades of orange on this slide, on this graph, what you get is 52% who say, boy, we need to completely overhaul the integration of cybersecurity and backup, or we need to do significant work on it. So netting it out, we'll leave aside the 1% who live in a perfect world. 52% of our respondents were convinced that there needs to be a lot of additional work done to actually get alignment where it needs to be between the organization's cybersecurity posture and the organization's backup posture.
Yeah, and if we kind of even click on that just a little bit further, want to bring in now on the right-hand side some additional data points here. And what we're seeing here again are the four different personas, so we can cut this data by the different groups. And what I think is interesting is 62% of the backup administrators, if you add up the orange bars there, meaning a complete overhaul at the bottom bar, and then a significant improvement at the second to the bottom bar there. 62% of the backup responses say there's a lot of work to be done. 56% for the security professionals think that there's a lot of work to be done. And if I make one other comment before I pass it over to you, look over at the Chief Information Security Officer on the right-hand side. He or she says, yeah, we're doing just fine, some improvement maybe at 19%, by far the highest. In fact, often cases over double what the backup admin security professionals thinking in that regard.
Yeah, exactly. That 19% is, well, it would be great if they're right, and I can understand why the CISOs would broadcast it that way. If you look at the orange bars here and take that as a sort of the two orange bars added up, that 62% for backup admins and 56% for security professionals, This is kind of the level of doubt, the index of doubt in the organization that things are where they need to be. When I looked at this stat, what struck me is that the two teams of people who are most hands-on, who would have the most reason to know, because they're most deeply involved, where things stand with the integration of these strategies, are also the ones who are most doubtful. And that's the hands-on backup admins and the hands-on security admins.
Yeah, exactly. It's the more of a domain expert you are, the more you're kind of in the trenches, if you will, the more vulnerabilities that you probably experience. But also, I think it's just the nature of the engineering mindset to worry about the gaps, the exposures. And in this case, as we see, our colleague Edwin, he likes to say, the bad guys only have to be right once. The good guys, meaning those protecting the organization and the systems, have to be right. Ideally all the time, but much more often than once, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely true. And let's back up. This might have been something that we've reviewed in the past, but for folks who haven't watched Dave and Jason in particular go through results like this, you might be asking yourself, why does Veeam ask if the answer came from a person whose main job responsibility is IT operations or security professional or backup admin or C-level IT management? And the answer is a lot of what we do is exactly what we're doing now. It's education. First, we educate ourselves by getting this, and then that gives us good guidance on how we need to educate customers, depending on what their role is, about the market realities that are out there. So we may have folks at the C-level who perhaps have a little bit of excessive optimism about how well the integration is going. And it can be helpful to have them see this so that they could go back to their teams and say, well, on average, apparently, if you're hands-on with this, you're not as confident as I am. What's the actual facts? So the goal is to empower ourselves for how we talk about this, but also to empower the people who are on here so that you can have better conversations in your organization about what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I always like to say with any of our research is, you owe it to yourself to get informed. This is industry-wide research. This isn't just about Veeam customers, or this isn't about one certain market segment or one geography. This is a great way, actually, in my opinion, to have a conversation in your organization to say, where do we self-assess that we're at? Do we align with global trends, or do we think we're somewhere to the right or to the left of that? But addressing that ahead of time is actually far more important than trying to come up with after you've been breached.
Yep, absolutely.
So in my mind, Jeff, I could argue that the previous slide, the first slide we opened with, was the most concerning. I'll actually say we're going to bookend with maybe one that's even more concerning. And, let's unpack this. So we asked about incident response teams, or the acronym IRT. The question was, prior to your last cyber event, did your organization's incident response team have a defined ransomware response playbook that incorporated any of the following? So you could choose multiple. And what you see here, Jeff, I'll jump to the bottom. I always like to hit the boundaries. Kind of a good news, but really also a concerning notion. It's good that it's very small at the bottom of the list. 3% say we don't have an incident response team. 5% say we did not have a ransomware playbook. It's good that that falls to the bottom of the list. So that's, I guess, glass half full. Now I'll go glass 3/4 empty, which is, if you add that up, that's 8% in this day and age, more than halfway through 2022, ransomware getting as much publicity as it has. Approximately 1 out of 12 organizations are really falling behind, and they're really not prepared. That almost seems hard to imagine in this day and age.
Yeah, it is kind of appalling. I will note we have two big reports, and we use ransomware data from both of those. This one, if you're noticing that the number of respondents is lower than in some of the previous questions we've asked, that's because this is from the Ransomware Trends Report that was released in May at Veeam. This has 1,000 respondents worldwide. In this case, 998 of the folks who were surveyed answered this particular question. And everyone in this survey had actually been hit by a ransomware attack. So this was the criterion for being included in the survey was you'd been hit by a ransomware attack at least once in the previous year. And to Dave's point, 8% of the folks who admitted that they'd been hit by a ransomware attack had no incident response playbook or incident response team or ransomware playbook. Going to the top of the line, the news is a little bit better, though, because the biggest single stat, and again, these don't add up to 100 because we asked people to select all of the answers that were accurate for their environment. But the one that was selected, the single answer selected by most respondents, was that we do have taking a look at backup copies and assured cleanliness of our backups, assured usability of the backups as a critical thing that we do as part of our playbook for incident response, and verifying that the backups are happening as frequently as they need to be done and that they're useful, that the backups completed successfully is also part of the solution. That's the second highest single answer. So Dave alluded to the bad news, which is the 8%. But if we look at the top, backup is taken very seriously for incident response. And folks are clear that the work of making sure those backups are going to work for them has to happen before the incident takes place by taking a look at backup logs and making sure that we're backing up as frequently as we need to.
Yeah. And I see we've got a question that's come in. Question is from Powell, who asks, for the Veeam repository, the immutable backup capability, which protocol is best to share, is better to use NFS, and which is the best Linux distribution? I'm going to give a couple comments, Jeff. You feel free to chime in as well. I kind of favor Ubuntu, but I know other people have their preferences. We certainly claim support on several different distributions. I just see it probably in the field, Ubuntu is used quite a bit, so I kind of lean in that direction. Don't know if you see anything differently.
Well, what I've seen customers choose is that or Red Hat Enterprise Linux. If they've gone with Red Hat Enterprise Linux and that's their standard, that's what they go with. In terms of distributions, the key thing is that it has to support XFS, because for the hardened Linux repository, we need to be able to use the XFS file system with immutability tagged for that. In terms of which protocol is better for sharing is to use, the hardened Linux repository is a direct attached storage. So you typically are going to reach it in that respect, not by sharing it out via other sharing protocols. You're going to hit it directly as a direct attached disk repository. And so that's the good answer for that as well. If we look at this, if we look at the stats, I'll just return a little bit here. It's kind of interesting that the answers that we got do cover correctly so many of the different options that you would want to have in an incident response team. One of the things that I found a little bit troubling looking at this is that the isolation plan, the shortest, if you look right in the middle, was only at 24%. So only 24% of respondents, when they talk about things that are a component of their cybersecurity incident response plan, say that they have a plan to isolate the affected systems basically immediately or in a very planned.
The takeaway is that a lot goes into an appropriate plan. A lot goes into having multiple methods and techniques to be able to ensure that you can be as resilient as possible. That's true even outside of ransomware, but it's a good reminder there is no one single silver bullet. So let's take a look at the map one last time. I know that we've had Pennsylvania come through, if I didn't mention before, as well as Massachusetts. I believe Italy and Germany, again, additional person from Germany's come in. And then someone that's actually from United Arab Emirates, but is currently located in Pakistan, I believe, is also chiming in. So thank you very, very much for that. Really appreciate all the various hours that everyone tunes in live. And Jeff, I should give a shout out that typically within a week or so after we're live, which is on our Monday, we'll see oftentimes 2 or even 3 times as many people replaying this on the various platforms that we stream and persist the data on. So
yeah, Lunchtime Eastern time is convenient for you and me, Dave, but the fact is it may not be convenient. And as everyone can see, we've got viewers from all over the world. So we do make this live stream available on all the platforms you can reach it from after the fact. So look forward to those who can't dial in, or if you want to rewatch for any points, please do check it out later on.
Yeah, and just a look ahead now, we are not going to have a Friday Tech Bites this particular Friday, meaning a couple days from now, but we are going to double click on ransomware in terms of the actual techniques and the abilities that Veeam can bring to the table. So a little bit more of a Veeam commercial, if you will, than we're usually doing on these live streams. But in particular, next week, a week from today, Jason will be back in the fold, and our colleague Melissa, who's been on the stream a number of times, they're going to start looking at how you can validate the recovery, how you can orchestrate and automate your response so that we can address that incident response team and plan better than what we saw in the previous chart. Now, 2 weeks from today, myself and one of our top SEs, meaning field engineers, Brad Lynch, he and I are going to go into a little more detail around backup repositories, what we had just commented on around the hardened Linux backup repository, as well as hardening the solution overall. I think what we'll end with, Jeff, is, we've talked a lot about the challenge. We've talked a lot about the opportunity, but next couple of weeks, we want to offer some specifics in terms of best practices and some specifics in terms of Veeam to try to put everyone in a better recovery posture.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Setting the table is not enough. We've also got to put some food on the table. So we're going to have some solutions that you can get more out of over the next couple of weeks to harden your environment and improve your posture.
Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. Until the next stream, stay safe, stay positive. Be sure to check out the ransomware research report as well as some of the past streams that may be of interest. Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone.